Lieutenant Colonel Leo Gray is a decorated P-51 pilot and served as one of the original World War II Tuskegee Airmen. Gray was born and raised as an only child in Boston, Massachusetts, and shortly after graduating from high school in 1942, he volunteered to serve in the U.S. Army Air Corps. After passing the mental and physical tests required for pilot training, he completed basic training at Keesler Air Force Base. Gray completed 1 year of college at the Tuskegee Institute before he became a cadet at the Tuskegee Army Airfield as part of the Tuskegee Flying Experiment. The experiment was intended to prove if blacks could, in fact, be trained to fly. And despite the tremendous racial barriers of the time, Gray was flying solo by January 1944. In March 1945, he found himself stationed at Ramitelli Air Base, Italy, as a combat fighter in the P-51 Mustang for the 100th Fighter Squadron 332nd Fighter Group. There, he conducted missions to escort and protect B-24 and B-17 bombers, as well as photo reconnaissance aircraft during combat missions over German-occupied territory. German adversaries came to fear and respect the Tuskegee Airmen for their aerial combat skills. In late March 1945, while on an escort mission, he encountered 2 German enemy aircraft. After several tense moments, Gray dropped his wing tanks in preparation to strike, but just before firing, the enemy jets broke off, allowing the U.S. aircraft to return safely to Ramitelli. For achievements made during his 15 combat missions, Gray was awarded the Air Medal with 1 Oak Leaf Cluster and the Presidential Unit Citation. He transitioned from active duty in 1946 to the Air Force Reserves, where he finished his 41-year military career in 1984. Due to the courage and tenacity of Gray and others like him, President Truman desegregated the United States military in 1948. In 2006, President George W. Bush awarded all Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal and offered words of atonement for the racial prejudices the Tuskegee Airmen experienced while serving their country so valiantly. Air Command and Staff College is proud to honor Lieutenant Colonel Leo Gray as an Eagle.
Please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Colonel Leo Gray, interviewed by Major Carrie Roman.
Colonel Gray, on behalf of the Air Command Staff and College student body, faculty, and leadership, we want to say thank you so much for being here today. It's truly our honor.
Well, it's a thrill for me. I was shocked last fall when they asked me to come, and I said, why me? You know, I hadn't done anything. But then I wasn't sure I was going to make it either because I was scheduled for that operation.
Yes,
But
sir. Well,
I
thank
came
goodness
through,
your
yeah.
health is in good condition. Colonel Gray just celebrated his 90, can I share? Can I share your age?
Yeah.
His 93rd birthday this
92.
week. 92nd
I'm going
birthday.
on 93.
Okay.
I'm trying to catch up with Colonel Cole.
I have no doubt you're going to get there. Well, Colonel Gray, please go ahead and take us back to your childhood and what it was like when you were growing up in Boston during World War II.
Well, as you know, that I was born in 24, so that meant that I managed to be around during the Great Depression. And I was fortunate in that my father had a job throughout the Depression. So I never had to suffer like a lot of folk did. Not that he made a lot of money, but at least we had food, clothing, and shelter throughout the Depression years. And times were a lot different then. We didn't have cars. As a matter of fact, you know, most of the fellows in the who were from the big cities like New York and Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, didn't drive. we didn't have to drive because we had excellent transportation system. I never drove until I got to Ramitelli, and they told me I was the officer of the day, and I said, "Where's my driver?" They said, "You drive yourself." I said, "Well, I don't know how to drive." And they said, "Well," they told me about the H shift. And so I got in the Jeep, and it was parked on a hill, and it kept rolling downhill. Every time I tried to move it, and they said, "Well, put your foot on the brake." Well, that was my driving lesson. From then on, I was on my own. But anyhow, in my childhood years, we moved around, and for a while I was living on Kennard Street with my maternal grandmother on the second floor, and I managed to fall down the steps, 2 flights of steps. You know, they were all metal steps, and I wasn't hurt. I don't know, I bumped my head and that was wrong with me or what, but anyhow, I managed to persevere, and we moved over to, my grandmother died, and then we moved to a house on Haskins Street, and I went to a school. I can't remember the name of my elementary school. It always bugs me. But I used to come home every now and then, and my hands would be red, doing things I wasn't supposed to do. And my mother would beat me too. But that's the way it was. And then they didn't, today if you touch your child, you have to go to jail, right? But it wasn't that way then. And discipline was a little more strict. But I was fortunate, and we went to a Dudley school, and we had some of my classmates. I ran across one of my father's, Cliff Wharton. We became good friends back then. A lot of you probably never heard of him, but he ended up being a Tuskegee Airman also, but he never finished. They let him out. That's another story. But he was one of the probably greatest achievers of the documented original Tuskegee Airmen. But I had a good childhood, and I had no awareness of discrimination until I got to junior high school, and I was in a play, The Toy Soldier. I was a toy soldier, and the princess and a lot of the other people in the cast wanted me to be the prince. The guy that was the prince was not quite all there, but anyhow. They wouldn't let me be the prince because she was white, and that was pointed out to me. But we managed to persevere and get through. And then I went on to Boston English High School, which was the oldest high school in the country. And I didn't study hard. A lot of kids at school, especially high school, I had to do my homework and stuff, but I didn't study too hard, but I was a B student. And I played in the band. And the band director would give me a hard time, but I ended up the first seat in the band, and he wouldn't give me a promotion. He wouldn't give me a commission. He gave everybody a commission. He asked me to find a band leader, and a drum major. When I got a drum major, didn't know how to know his left foot from his right foot. I had to point it out to him. But he made him captain of the band. And we had another fellow who was the first lieutenant and second lieutenant, and I was still a private. And one of the second lieutenants had to drop out, and so that was an opening, but he wouldn't give it to me. And I had the first seat, and so I was kind of a little miffed about that. But I also played in the Boston Public Schools Symphony Band. I started out in the fourth seat, and by the time we came to our concert, I had the first seat. And the guys in the band told me to go as a captain, not as a private. So I said, okay. I did that just to miff our band director. And I showed up as a captain, 4-flusher. But I got through it, and the band director never said a word to me, but I came back to the band as a private. And also in track, I ran the dash and the track. I wouldn't run, my track coach wanted me to run the 800, but you had to practice for that. And I didn't go to practice, and I missed 5 track meets because it conflicted with rehearsals for the Boston Public Schools Symphony Band, so the coach didn't like me. And so I missed my letter by 5 points, and I easily would have gotten the 5 points had I participated in those track meets. But I had a great time going through high school, and one of the fellows that we used to hang out with in some of our activities after school, some of you may have heard of Malcolm X. He was Malcolm Little, but he was at school with me in Boston. And after high school, I worked for the Boston Army Port of Embarkation, and I started out as a laborer, and then I got to be a tally clerk, counting everything we were doing. And we had German prisoners of war as our labor gangs, and we were loading 500-pound, 1,000-pound bombs onto the ships to go to England for delivery to Germany. So I don't think these POWs appreciated it. And when they found out, one of the fellows with whom I was carpooling, Frank Roberts, had taken the test to become an aviation cadet. He says, if you take the test to become a cadet, you won't have to go in as a private, and you can, get your choice. So back then, the blacks going into the military, going into the Navy as stewards, or going into the Army, doing menial-type tasks. And so I said, well, I will take the test, and I passed. And so the rest is history. Right after we took the test, my buddy and I, we went to New York for a weekend to show off that we were men. And I ended up with a blind date that I could have done worse. It was Dorothy Dandridge. Some of you may have heard of her. And I think I did pretty good. But anyhow, the rest was history. We worked until the following year. In January, Frank got called to cadet. He got called in April, and I got called in May. But he graduated in January, and I graduated in August. The difference was that he was went into the last class to go directly in cadets. I had to go down to Casely Field as a private for $50 a month for 30 days basic training. Then we came up to Tuskegee, a college training detachment. So a lot of folk think all the pilots for Tuskegee Airmen were college graduates. That wasn't true. The first class, yeah, they were all college graduates. As a matter of fact, one of them had a PhD that washed out. But the Tuskegee Airmen, like everybody else, was hurting for replacements. And they started a college training detachment throughout the Air Force. And the idea was to give us the equivalent of core curriculum courses prior to entering the cadet program. And so I was called. They told me to report May 23rd. I said, well, I have to clear my job at the Boston Port of Embarkation. Since I was a federal employee, they gave me an extra day of grace. And so I left on May 24th. And had I left on the 23rd, I would have gone with my classmates, and the train went on down through Washington over to Cincinnati. But when they left Cincinnati, they were all kicked out of their Pullmans and put up into the Jim Crow car up front because to give seats to German POWs and other folks that wanted Pullmans. And but by leaving on the 24th, I was by myself. When I got to New York, I looked out, I saw this gorgeous blonde, wife of a major, Air Force major. She ended up as my berth mate. Not my berth mate, but she had the lower berth and I had the upper. And she and her daughter, and we had a great time on the way to Washington. And but when we left Washington, I watched her daughter while she went to eat dinner. And then they called me to come eat dinner. And that was my first exposure to racial discrimination in the United States, because when I sat down in the corner, they pulled a curtain in front of me so I wouldn't have to look at any of the white people, or vice versa. But that's the way it was back then. And there was, interestingly enough, this Air Force lieutenant that was trying to hit on this young lady who was sitting with me. And he would take a drink or two every time he came through the train, and she wasn't responding. When we got to Atlanta, he was so obnoxious that the MPs came and took him off the train. And we had a very relaxed trip from Atlanta to Biloxi, Mississippi. But there was my beginning of my Air Force career.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. So it sounds like that you had had a couple experiences before you had come to the Deep South. Explain what racism was like in the Deep South versus the North. And at the time that you had arrived to training, did you experience any segregation or discrimination?
Well, when I got to Biloxi, I stayed on the base. I wasn't going to go in that town. I was afraid to go in town because I didn't want to get lynched, you know. And in Boston, we had a local paper, and we'd talk about the South, and all I would see was lynchings going on all around. And coming from the North, sometimes you don't behave like you ought to. And I didn't want to take any unnecessary chances, so most of us tended to stay in the base, and you learn after a while to just go with the flow and do what you're supposed to do, and we managed to hang in there and persevere.
Yes, sir. How long does your training last, and can you describe some of what you've experienced?
Well, I had 30 days at basic training at Keesler Field, and then we moved up to Tuskegee. It was funny, when we pulled into Cheehaw, we were up front, and the trucks picked us up, took us to the base. We lived in Emory's on campus, and we were there until October, and then we moved out to the air base at the classification, and then into pre-flight before we came back to the campus where we were housed for primary training, and we did our flying out of Moulton Field, which is now a National Historic Site, about 30 miles, some odd 30 few miles down the road from here. And which is, those of you that have the opportunity to get there, I encourage you to do so, because it's a nice little museum. Not very large, but it's small, and it's historic. But the training I had, we stayed on the base. I had no problem from anybody, and our primary training, all of our instructors were black, but we had our check pilots were white officers. And as a matter of fact, I remember my check pilot took me out to Shorter Field, which is between here and Tuskegee. He got out of the airplane, he said, "All right, go kill yourself," which I didn't. That was the beginning of my solo flying, and it went on great from there. Came on back to the airfield for basic training. Well, all of our instructors in basic in advance were white when I came through. You know, it's sort of like a merry-go-round, and all of you that had been through the program, everything was changing constantly. And as things improved and so forth. Our planes didn't change, but some of the systems, I think before we got through, some of the fellows were flying B-25s in advanced pilot training before they were flying AT-10s when I came through. But once we graduated from pilot training, we came down to Eglin Field in Florida for gunnery. And on the way down, we stopped at a little convenience store, the guys, to get some sodas, and they refused to sell us anything because we were black. So we had to keep on going. We got down to Eglin Field, and then we couldn't go in a PX or in theater. We were pretty much restricted to our BOQ. They let us take stuff out of the theater, but we couldn't go to the officers' club. German prisoners of war had free access to everything, but we couldn't. and we managed to get through that. Interestingly enough, when I graduated and I came back from my home leave, I noticed a couple of the white officers sitting outside the PX, with the brown bag lunches. I said, why don't you go inside? It's more comfortable. Well, it was against the law in Alabama for whites and blacks to eat under the same roof. And so they chose to eat outside. Well, that was their problem. But what had happened, the War Department in July had issued a directive to integrate facilities for military installations. Colonel Noel Parrish, who was our base commander, integrated all facilities at Tuskegee. But these guys chose not to integrate. And things were different. And so when we completed our transition in the P-40s, we moved on to Walterboro. I was telling somebody that a little town north of here, Sylacauga, that I almost destroyed because I almost ran into it in a night flight. I'm flying along, and I got vertigo, I think, because I saw a battleship. I said, what's this battleship doing in the middle of Alabama? And I'm heading right into it, so I turned to avoid it. And the more I turned, closer I got to it. And I said, get on instruments. So I put my head down, and my needle was way over to the left. My ball was way over to the right. My airspeed was 5 miles above stalling. Had I not gone on instruments, I wouldn't be here today. But when I straightened the airplane out, and I felt more comfortable, I looked outside, and I'll be damned, that battleship was the city of Sylacauga. But I missed it. But anyhow.
I wanted to ask you, moving forward, you do your combat training, and at that point, how old were you?
19.
19 years old. So I think most of us can imagine what we were doing at the age of 19 and maybe not making all of the wisest decisions. Colonel Gray, you told me a story once about you with a couple other pilots, and you're doing some training, and I affectionately call them shenanigans. Can you tell the story about the bridge up north?
Oh, I don't know what the minimum altitude for today is, but then it was 300 feet for navigation. And there were three of us, only our instructor pilot, and Bill Rice and I. And so he had some friends at very wealthy family, and he wanted to buzz their house. So we went across this field. There's a huge field approaching the house, and I noticed 3 strips in the grass as we were approaching the house. That was us. We were cutting the grass going to the home. And we were so low that the propellers were going through the grass. But we got to the house and we pulled up. So then we went along, and so kept my turn, and we were along a river. I said, oh boy. So we went down, but we stayed high enough so that our wings avoided the stumps along the side of the river and stuff. And so he said, Lieutenant Gray, do you know where you are? I thought I was heading toward Charleston, but wasn't sure. I pulled up, I saw a bus, and I pulled up, and so I banked to go see where the bus was going. And as I was getting ready to pull over in front of the bus, he said, pull up that damn airplane. So we pulled up, and so we went on down. Sure enough, it was Charleston. And so the 3 of us went over, and anybody here from Charleston, the old Cooper River Bridge has been replaced now, but they had the 3 of us went under it in formation, and the bridge span, it was less than wingspan of our 3 P-47s. I don't know how we did it, but we did a little V formation going through that bridge. Then we went up to Charleston Airport, still below altitude, and we were right on the river. And we got to and the ceiling was about 75 feet. And we got up to the tower, and those of you who saw Top Gun can appreciate what we did. As we zoomed up across the tower, and then all of a sudden, 3P4 to 7, the boys, the Charles, the tower, what was your numbers? And they started screaming all over the Southeast Flying Training Command trying to find us. And we went south to Florida. And then we got down to Florida, we saw, you know how you see these bales of hay, round bales of hay? They're all out there in the field. Hey, look. So we went down and started blasting those things apart. And finally we decided to go home. And so we called Waldoboro for a homing, and they gave us a accordance to fly home. And they said, the Charleston Tower says the 3P-47 buzzed their tower. Was that you? No, we've been down in Florida. But we got home, they never caught us.
Sir, you're getting orders. They're going to send you to Ramitelli, Italy. At that time, the Double Victory campaign is happening in the United States. Can you describe to the audience what that was about?
Well, Double V was V for victory and against the Germans. Also V for victory over racial discrimination. As a matter of fact, when I arrived at Waldoboro, you know, the base was strictly segregated. But we took all the signs off the buses. We sat in the theater, integrated the theater and everything. And as a matter of fact, Class 44D was getting ready to go overseas when we arrived. And they trucked them up to Yemassee, where they caught the train to go to the port of embarkation. And when they got to Yemassee, if anybody ever gets to Yemassee today, it hasn't changed. It's just like it was back then. Right across the street from the railroad station is a little convenience store. So they went in to try to get some sodas. And the guy pulled a gun on him and said, I don't serve no niggers, and he'd get out. Well, what had happened when they left Waldoboro, they gave each man a .45 pistol with 2 clips of ammunition because they're going to war. So they all had guns. When this guy pulled his rifle on them, they all pulled out their guns. And so he said, which one of us are you going to shoot? Well, someone got word of it, and people started pulling up cars outside the store, and they're getting ready for kind of a little pitch battle. Well, the provost marshal found out what was going on, and he got the guys out of there, and on the train, they had, in the meantime, pulled in, and they managed to get out of Yemassee without an incident. Well, word got back to the base, and nobody had ever heard it. Well, where is Yemassee? So we all wanted to see Yemassee, so we figured we'd get a close-hand look. And so we started flying over Yemassee low. And we were flying P-47s, you know, they had 850 caliber machine guns in P-47. And the guys would buzz like a drive-bombing thing hitting down over Yemassee. We didn't have any more trouble in Yemassee. I think they were afraid somebody was going to open fire. But that was our introduction to Waldoboro.
Yes, sir. Sir, to fast forward a little bit, you arrive at Ramitelli, Italy. Can you tell us what those first couple days were like? At this point, you hadn't even figured out which aircraft you're going to be in.
Oh, that was interesting, because as a matter of fact, on route overseas, that we left March 1st on a Navy transport, and there were 15 of us. And there were 15 replacements for a Black Widow night fighter group. And we had nice officers' quarters and everything. And these Black Widow guys had to sleep down in the hole. It paid to be black, see? And because we got treated nice. They didn't want us down in the hole with these white boys. So we got overseas. They took us to the replacement depot in Caserta. And the night before we left, we were in the officers club, and we all got thrown out because I think we were all drunk. And And we had gone out to the King's Palace in Caserta, and it was like sitting in that first two seats over here, and the rest of the room was practically empty. And so we ordered some drinks and took them back to the club and got all the guys to come in. And as I say, they kicked us out of the club. So I went, we arrived at Ramitelli on March 14th. 2 days before, on March 12th, the last of the pilots for the 302nd Fighter Squadron had departed the base. And those who didn't leave were reassigned to the other squadrons. So but I was given plane number 2, which had been Major Madison's plane. He was the group, our squadron operations officer got moved up to headquarters. And so Lieutenant Ellington had completed his tour of duty, but they said that he could take me up on an orientation ride. So I said, okay. So we went up, and I thought I was a hot pilot. I wasn't going to let him get below me and do anything I couldn't do. So we came back, and oh man, we had a great time. And we buzzed that field and rolled over the field and everything, and I got back, and my crew chief said, "You're in trouble." I said, "Why? I didn't do anything wrong." He said, "Oh, you're not supposed to do a roll unless you got a victory. You guys rolled over the field. Colonel Davis wants to see you." Well, if anybody knows the reputation of Colonel Davis, he was a West Pointer, and he was a rough customer. He ate us alive. He went up one side and down the other. He fined Ellington $125, and he put me on probation. You know, the guy died and never took me off probation.
Colonel Gray, at this point you take over Little Florence, your P-51.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You're handed a manual, and I understand that you're given a couple days to figure her out. You are now ready for combat. Would you mind telling us what it was like, your first experience in that P-51, the first time that you were in that aircraft escorting bombers?
Well, we were flying over the Alps around 25,000 feet, and all of a sudden, out of an outhouse came a burst of flak. And it was about from here to that light over that wall off my wing. That's pretty close, 25,000 feet. I'm looking over there. You know, when they show you the movies of flak and everything, it looks like one thing, but when you see it in person, it's different. Man, that's a bunch of crap. And that was close to me. I said, Jesus, that was close. And I looked back and everybody was gone. And I looked over, hell, they'd all pulled to the left. And so I pulled over to catch up with them. And someone says, "Bogey, 6 o'clock. And so they dispatched a flight to engage me in combat. And I say, "Hey, I'm trying to get back in formation." Oh man, they gave me a hard time over that.
Most people like to ask Tuskegee Airmen about successful strikes and kills. You and I have had this discussion that in your time there, your mission, you saw it a little differently. It wasn't necessarily about kills. It wasn't about becoming an ace. Can you share some thoughts?
Well, you know, it's a pretty big sky. And if you don't see an airplane, you can't shoot them down. And I only saw 3 German planes the whole time I was up there on 15 missions. One was a Henkel, which was way off, and we couldn't leave the bombers to go after it. And the others, on April 1st, we encountered a couple of Me-262 jets. Actually what happened, on March 24th, the 15th Air Force had a mission to Berlin. And for that mission, we had 100-gallon tanks. And we were supposed to have had target penetration and been relieved, but I think the 31st Fighter Group. But they had some problems getting up there, and they didn't show up. So since we had the 110-gallon tanks, we stayed with the bombers over Berlin. And when they got over Berlin, the Germans set up all these jets and so forth, including a P-51 with black swastika after us. Well, we managed to destroy 3 Me-262s, and my squadron, the 100th, and they probably destroyed 2 other Me-262s, and they probably destroyed an Me-163 rocket plane. And the 301st Squadron, the 99th Squadron, rather, damaged 3 Me-262s. One of the pilots, the group leader with the 301st, Armour McDaniel, he was shot down by an Me-262. And so that was a rather successful day. But I find a lot of the times the record, they just say destroyed and damaged. They don't mention the probables. Well, to a fighter pilot, a probable counts. I mean, you're not sure whether you got them or not, but you think you did, but you don't have verification from an eyewitness or camera gunnery. But anyhow, on the following week, the 301st and the 99th were doing strafing missions over Yugoslavia. And in the 2 days, they managed to destroy 25 aircraft, and we lost 4. And on April 1st, the 3 of us ended up escorting from the 100th P-38 to Prague, but we had 75-gallon tanks. From Berlin, we had 110-gallon tanks, but normally we flew with 75-gallon tanks. Prague is not that far from Berlin. And so it was a P-38, we got to Prague. This guy was kind of, and so he wanted to go further. So we said, okay, we'll go a little further. And then we were ready to turn back. He said, well, just a little further. So we said, okay. And so the 3rd time he wanted to go further, we said, well, you're going to be on your own, because there's no point in us losing 3 P-51s because we run out of gas, so you can get some pictures. And someone said, bogey's 12 o'clock. Well, they had 2 German Me-262s had been dispatched to greet us. And they came over, flying circles around us. He said, what'll I do? He said, take the number 2 slot and keep quiet. And we headed home as fast as we could. We were doing about 350 miles an hour. And these jets were flying rings around us about 5,000 feet. And they came down to about 1,200 feet, and we could see them then. I said, gee, I thought we were supposed to have the best airplane in the sky. And these guys are 100 miles an hour faster than us. Then they came on the approach to attack. Before they got within range, we dropped tanks. And when they saw us drop tanks, they broke off. I think they must have remembered the week before in Berlin. But anyhow, they knew we were ready for them, and so they broke off. The rest of the trip was uneventful. We got home, didn't hear a peep out of this guy. Well, in 2008, I was at an Air Force Council meeting in Broward County, and they had this guest speaker. It's a colonel who had flown, was a fighter pilot in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He said, Colonel Gray, were you ever at Ramitelli? I said, yes. He said, you remember a mission with 3 P-51 to the P-38? So we had a lot of missions escorting P-38s. As a matter of fact, we had 129 missions escorting photo reconnaissance planes, either P-38s or Mosquitoes. I didn't know that count at that time, but that's what it was. Anyhow, he said, well, I was a P-38 pilot. And I told him we encountered the jets. I said, you were? He said, yeah. I said, well, I talk about you like a dog. But anyhow, he says, I don't know why they had you guys escort me, because there was a P-38 group north of me that they could have escorted me. I said, yeah, but we got your ass home safe, didn't we? In 2008, he's still worried about these black pilots escorting him in 1945.
Colonel Gray, I want to go back to a comment that you had made earlier, and that was Top Gun. Here at Gathering of Eagles, we talk a lot about bridging generations. So this generation sitting before you is very familiar with the movie Top Gun. But what do those 2 words mean to you?
Well, in I think it was 1949, the Air Force had its first Top Gun competition out in Vegas. And the 332nd Fighter Group sent a flight to participate. And as it turned out, they won first place with conventional aircraft. That's pretty good. First place, Top Gun. As a matter of fact, Albert Temple, there was some debate as to whether he was the Top Gun pilot. There was some question about some of the calculations of the performance. But anyhow, they got back to the base, and you know, the Air Force was supposed to start integrating in 1948, but not much was happening. The day after they got back to Lockburn, they started integrating the Air Force. I guess they weren't going to have any more Top Gun winners. And so today you see here, total integration.
Sir, unfortunately our time is coming to a close. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much for being here, and to your family as well. On that note, I'd like to ask, would you like to go ahead and provide any words before we depart?
Well, I was noticing the Colonel before was talking about his 4 Fs. One of my co-workers, Colonel McGee, was talking about 4 Ps, but I kind of think in terms of 5 Ps, because the first one would be perceive, plan, prepare, produce, and persevere. Now, if you start with planning, that's because somebody else told you what to do. But now, you're all here now to learn how to do things, and a lot of you have ideas, and a lot of times you think of things that have never happened before, and we're in your life that you have to start from scratch, and nobody tells you what to do. You come up with an idea that you perceive that something could be. Once you perceive it, then you say, well, how's it going to go? You have to develop a plan to follow through with your perception. And then if you follow a plan, you have to prepare to implement the plan. After the preparation, then you have to produce it. That's when it starts getting tough. Because in the production phase, things don't always go the way you want. Sometimes you may want to quit. That's when you have to start persevering. And if you persevere, you can accomplish almost anything you start out to do. But one thing that has bothered me about the situation, all of you are here members of the Air Force. I don't know how many of you are members of the Air Force Association or the VFW or any of these groups. But as you look here, the Eagles are a generation ahead of you, sometimes 2 generations. But they need you. The Air Force Association needs you. The VFW, they need you. These organizations are hurting because of a lack of participation of young people. Your communities need you. Why try to start something new when there's already something in existence that you can participate in to help better the living conditions and so forth? A lot needs to be done, not by the government, but by the community. These are organizations and being that you're familiar with. Participate. Go on out there and be part of your community. They really, really need you. Join the Air Force Association and participate in their local activities. Join the American Legion, participate in their activities. They're great organizations.
With that, sir, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Leo Gray.